if people scream for an inordinate amount of time, that's like one of my like nip things. Like, it's like what we talked about in Aquaman.
Sure.
You can't tell me that there's a shred of irony in my enjoyment of Patrick Wilson going, "Rise Atlantis!" Like that. It's that same kind of energy, or at least understanding of comic book storytelling and character present in the Fantastic Four. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision.
GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more.
And we conclude Superhero Month with a superhero movie that was never really released. This is infamously known as Roger Corman's The Fantastic Four, because Roger Corman was a producer on it. It's more apropos, I feel, to call this Oli Sasson's The Fantastic Four.
Sure. Oli Sasson was the director that Corman and company hired to put on this project. And this is an odd episode right off the bat for us to do because we know the lot of you have not seen this movie or will not watch this movie or will not have seen this movie by the time you're hearing this episode. And so talking about this as like a piece of film history, it's okay that you may not have a lot of awareness of it. So we'll have to do a little bit of explaining the history of the thing before we actually get to the thing, I think.
Sure. There are multiple things to get to.
Sure, indeed.
Yes, I mean, this was a production that was being done by Roger Corman, extremely low budget, that was brought to them by, I believe, Constantine at the time.
Yeah, Constantine Film out of Germany.
Yes. And they were asking, hey, can you get a Fantastic Four movie made by the end of the year, which then was 1992, and can you make it for like $1 million or, less? And Roger Corman, being Roger Corman, is like, sure. And they got the money together and set off to make this Fantastic Four movie. And by all accounts, everybody involved up to a certain level was very much about like, hey, we are going to make the Fantastic Four movie, the first Fantastic Four movie. Now, it is important to note that the reason for the rushed production was that the rights were going to lapse, I believe on, Constantine, I'm assuming, that had the rights for the Fantastic Four. And that's why they were like, well, we need to prove that a movie's getting made and that so we can keep the rights. But Roger Corman, being Roger Corman, is like, well, you don't know how fast I can turn around a picture. Like,
you ain't seen nothing yet.
So they made a Fantastic Four movie, and I think we'll talk more about the end result of the movie later in the episode, but it was eventually shelved and became kind of comic book fan apocrypha and myth and legend up to a certain point. Like, there was this Fantastic Four movie that was made by Roger Corman, and it never got released, and rumors started circling about, it was never supposed to be seen. Like, it was made solely to hold on to the rights and all this kind of stuff. And I've known about this for so long and had never actually sat down to watch the movie, because the impression you get from most people that see the movie is that, well, this is an extremely rinky-dink Roger Corman production that, they're trying to make a big comic book movie on a budget of $1 million.
Right. It was a running gag in Arrested Development, for instance. It was basically a punchline that, like, have you heard of this like silly thing that they did? It was like sort of a curiosity in film history. And then the movie leaked. According to director Oli Sasson, he got his hands on a VHS tape of it somehow. Like, somebody finally managed to smuggle a copy of it out of storage and get it to him. And he had it duplicated. And he believes that someone who duplicated the video, like made a couple dubs for him, made a spare dub and distributed it underground. And so it became available at cons. Booths would sell it at cons and stuff like that. And that's how it's made the rounds and, how it's available to us today. Of course, it's in a legal gray area, but nobody is like particularly like safeguarding this particular movie at the moment.
It's freely out there. Like, you can very easily find a copy of this movie to watch. And you know what? I know we usually leave this for the tail end, but I think it's important, considering this is a movie that has not been seen and was shelved, I think it's fair to say that Travis and I recommend you watch the Fantastic Four.
Yeah. So here's the thing about this. Like, if you look at it just as a document and not a film, this screenplay, which was, written by one writer and then credited to another that did revisions on it. Like, if you read the screenplay, you could configure this screenplay and like any level of seriousness you wanted to. Like, it was a very like open-hearted comic book screenplay, filled with lots of like really sincere and like knowingly like cartoonish dialogue. But you can do a movie like that and also make it into a really extravagant and lavish production. Think Superman the movie. So it was the kind of screenplay that was kind of like infinitely reconfigurable. You could pour a ton of money into it and make a really impressive movie with almost the same screenplay. But when you take the screenplay and you're like, well, okay, we only have $1 million to pour into the production. We're going to use every shoestring technique in the book to get this movie made. The end result is like watching a feature-length television show pilot from the 70s or 80s. Like, that's the kind of production value that's on display in the movie. So if you've seen old shows like The Incredible Hulk, you kind of know what to expect here.
I would say that this ends up kind of looking for its time like the most impressive fan film made.
Yeah.
Like, because it is very clear that the people involved, certain people probably had a passing knowledge of the Fantastic Four, but people in key creative positions knew about the Fantastic Four, knew about the spirit of the comic and including, some very good details about the comic, but also weren't just there as a gig job, that they were really trying to make the best Fantastic Four movie they could under the conditions that they had. And by golly, that comes through in this movie.
Yeah, there is clearly like passion on display. And like even in the acting, like I don't think there's a single lazy performance in the film. Like, everybody actually seems to be really sincerely engaging with very goofy material. So let's start out by talking about the sort of center of the Fantastic Four, and that is Reed Richards. We first meet him in his post-grad days where he's studying, really advanced physics and things like that. And the actor's looking a little old to be where he is in his master's program, especially because they, will soon cut to 10 years later when he looks exactly the same.
But they put the trademark gray streak on the sides of his hair.
They do.
He's older now.
That's all they got to do. I mean, the crow's feet when he's fucking 19 or whatever. It's like, come on, guys. It's the age difference is highlighted, especially when he, in one scene, goes to the Storm home, and we meet Johnny and Sue Storm, who we know later will become the Human Torch and the Invisible Woman. Is that what she's called?
Mm-hmm,
yeah. Okay. And they're little kids. Like, Johnny Storm is playing a video game, and Sue Storm is played by the little Girl Scout character from the Addams Family movies. I was like, what is this?
She's the Girl Scout in one, and then she's the main bitchy girl at the summer camp in Values.
Yes, I'll be the victim. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, exactly. All your life.
Yeah.
But anyways, like it's this all establishes an extremely classically sincere comic book tone. Like, people say what they mean. There's no real ulterior motives in their dialogue. Everybody is straightforward with each other.
The heroes are nice people.
Extremely nice. Like this whole opening, it's cornball as all get out, but it's legit endearing. Like, and it's quick. Like, it understands it has to establish this emotional foundation quickly because they have to get to the big sci-fi scene that's going to set the plot off as far as another character is concerned. But it's there. Like, and
Yeah.
nobody's looking down their nose at the material. Everybody's playing it with the kind of sincerity that I think a lot of people ironically look at in stuff like soap operas.
Sure.
I think there's some soap operas and some soap opera actors that play to the extremes, knowing that that's like people are goofing on it. But then, like, if you really look back at classic soap operas, it's like, nah, man, everybody's buying this. And it's the same thing with this movie.
Yeah, well, I think there was also a really good understanding of what the material was by everybody on a performance level. Like they knew this was intended to be really lighthearted, and that's fine. You know, I really appreciate their approach approach to the material in that way. The goofiness of it and the jokes. I think there is a certain level of irony to enjoying it, but the challenge with I think material like this is being able to understand like when the movie is being ultra sincere and when it's actually pulling that off. Like its open-hearted goofiness at times may seem forced, but that also is a reminder that this is cinema. It's all manufactured, and it's something you need to get over. Like whether it is an extraordinarily expensive production or this rinky-dink, incredibly shoestring production.
Well, it's also a movie that is very clearly targeted for kids and kids of all ages.
Yes, absolutely.
I can't recall a single swear word.
No.
Like I can't recall a moment of any kind of legitimate extreme violence or even hinted at sexuality. Like this is one of the most G-rated movies we've done on this show in a long time.
There's not a trace of innuendo. You know, this isn't the kind of thing, you know, where it's not the kind of comic book these days that people will praise for being like, oh, actually, it's a really nuanced take on all these sorts of things. And it's not grimdark, but it's, you know, it mentions sex. And, you know, this is a kind of forgotten era comic book film where it's like, no, this is the most like pure distilled version of the hero, like nice people heroes fantasy. And I was like, I really admire that. Like, I don't think I've ever seen an official comic book film, which this was, like of a major property, approach the material with this level of clean sincerity.
Yeah.
You know, even the Superman movies have their like sexual innuendos and their violence and their drinking and their Marlboro ads, you know.
It's like people talk about with Pixar movies when it's like, that's there for the parents, you know, that's there for the adults kind of stuff. There's nothing here for them, but in not like a mean-spirited way. Like they really are like, this is what the comic book is. The comic book is supposed to be extremely accessible to readers of any age, and the content has to, you know, reflect that, and that's what they do. So eventually, Reed Richards and his friend and school partner Victor do a science experiment with this thing called Colossus, which is some kind of like space entity or something. It's a little nebulous.
It's a rogue planet, I think they say, that like,
yes.
is traveling through the solar system, and it, you know, it comes close enough to Earth for them to do some sort of experiment where they, I don't know, fire a laser at it, or they try to draw some energy from Colossus. Whatever the case may be, of course the experiment goes wrong. I believe Ben Grimm, who's played by Michael Bailey Smith, who I only knew to be a mutant under makeup in the Hills Have Eyes remake movies, but he's so openly dopey. He gets injured in the accident. I believe Dr. Richards gets minor injuries in the accident, but Victor is essentially like carted away on a stretcher and is treated as like dead.
He is pronounced dead. And then when he goes off, when they're in the morgue, these two attendants are leaning into the camera like, you know, we need to get His Majesty back to the kingdom or something like that. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, if you hear the term Victor, you know, the name Victor in a Fantastic Four movie, you know this is going to end up being Victor Von Doom. But I want to highlight the moment in the hallway in which Reed learns the news that Victor is dead. And he and Ben have this great hug.
Yeah. Like a really intimate, friendly, like sad hug with one another. And I'm like, huh, when do we see that? Like, how often do we see that among men that are like straight coded in films like this? Like never, right?
Director Oli Sassone frames it where it's kind of like a medium shot. He's a little distant. They're standing so that the light is coming in from the doorway at the end of the hallway. Like it feels like a very warm, holy moment. And It's like, I'm getting this from the Roger Corman Fantastic Four movie. What's going on? And why did nobody tell me about this?
Exactly. And then it's also littered with moments that are also just like straight up fun, but also are fun from an ironic standpoint. Like the moment where Victor gets zapped by the big green bolt of lightning or whatever it is that injures him. And he's just like, ah, for like 30 seconds straight.
There's no irony in that.
I thoroughly, sincerely enjoyed that.
So yes, we jumped 10 years later, and I think that they're going on a space exploration to Colossus.
They're going up into orbit to do some Colossus-related experiment. I don't think they're going to Colossus, but it's definitely Colossus-related. Again, these things aren't explained terribly well because they don't matter all that much. They really don't.
No, well, I mean, it's like if you read the comic and all you have to hear is like, they were going up in space and were hit by cosmic rays. Good enough for me. Like, that's all you need.
So the whole setup here is that, yes, Sue Storm is now of age. And of course there's immediate chemistry. You know, of course it's like, it's forced chemistry, but it's written in such a way that is like so broad that I can't hate it. It's just such cartoonery.
To the actor's credit, they earn it. Yes. Like, they play it as on the page, and in that way, it's like, I mean, yeah, if you really hate this, if this like makes you angry or you know, think it's total shit, I really think that's more a read on your feelings about blunt sincerity in regards to, you know, it's like a lot of male complaints about stuff like Hallmark Christmas movies or, you know, or soap opera, where it's like, yeah, these are the kind of emotions and stuff that are written, and we know that this isn't real life. Like, real people don't act that way. Great thing is that movies aren't real life.
Yes, and things like Hallmark Christmas movies get a lot of criticism for being formulaic. Who gives a fuck?
Well, if people like a formula,
something like this is just as formulaic in a way where we know what's going to happen. We know the good guys are going to win. We know that love will triumph and that evil will probably die by falling.
Yes.
That's what happens in this kind of movie.
Multiple times, multiple people, multiple evil falls in this movie.
Indeed. So the fact that all of this is approached with the utmost sincerity and that it's kind of working feels, I don't know, alchemical. Like there's something strangely magic about this. This is not a cursed film. This is not like a radioactive thing that they tried to bury.
A comparison that I'd like to point out from around that era is something like the Albert Pyun Captain America movie.
Sure.
That movie's certainly doing its best to hit certain notes about being a Captain America movie, but it's also just got all this other weird, boring ephemera that takes away from its comic bookness, where it's trying to be it tries to be another kind of movie at times. And because I think they're like, well, seeing a guy run around in this suit, you know, that's going to be for the kids. But again, like we got to cast Ned Beatty and do some gags and stuff with him that the adults will like. And the Fantastic Four really doesn't play to that ever. It's like, no, like we're just going to be a Fantastic Four comic movie. So when they come back and they have crashed their shuttle in this field and they have these wonderful, wonderful, like tinfoil cheap looking spacesuits.
Yeah. They kind of look like, they look like heat-proof suits kind of that people wear, the sort of silvery reflective material.
Like, I understand it's cheap and it's probably reused from some other Corman piece, maybe from the 60s or something, which, you know, it's okay because I looked at, I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen that kind of spacesuit in movies from the 50s and 60s.
Exactly. You know, I think that is the paradigm here that we have to employ to like approach this movie. Like, it's on that level of like, look, cheap science fiction productions with this kind of production quality are just as like just as valid an exploration of science fiction, even if they were made in the 90s and, you know, suddenly become infamous because they tried to crush this movie out of existence. Like, the fact that they're approaching it with such a classical, low budget approach, it shouldn't disqualify this movie from anybody watching it, let alone enjoying it. But, you know, getting together and, you know, somehow miraculously everybody surviving the shuttle crash is then followed by the exploration of sudden powers. And the effects gags they use to make the powers happen are incredibly simple, except for the Human Torch. There is some CGI employed for Human Torch's full flame-on appearances. The stretchy stuff is fucking killer, though. I love that stuff.
The stretchy stuff with Mr. Fantastic's great. Invisible Woman is like, I mean, they're pulling off gags that you could do in like the 30s in film.
Sure.
As far as that goes. Human Torch does have some CG. There is one character that they ain't cheaping out on. And that's the thing, Ben Grimm.
Yeah, they had the money to make one fully articulated thing suit. And, it actually performs really well in close up. I was shocked.
I mean, obviously, Josh Trank's Fantastic Four had the advent of having a totally CG thing, but this is the best live action thing that we've gotten. Like, I think this looks better than the Michael Chiklis suit.
I would have to see how the Chiklis thing works in motion, particularly with how well his...
It looks so rubber. It looks like a suit. Like, things don't move on the body quite right.
I'm sure that this would not look nearly as good as it did if you and I were to watch this in high definition. I'm sure if you and I actually saw this in high definition, which nobody can, it would not look nearly as good as it does, because the VHS dub actually makes the movie more charming in this instance. I don't think it would look very good. In
somewhat. I mean, we have seen clips from the trailer that premiered that does exist, in a higher definition. And I hate seeing it because I'm like, man, I want to watch that. Like, that looks really good. But, the Thing suit, yes, it's clearly a suit in this. Yes. But it is not a limitation to the performance that's going on, because the performance can be fairly straightforward. Like, and they, got enough where it's got lip and brow articulation, a little, whatever that tube that they run along the lips and brows and stuff, like they did for the Turtles masks and stuff.
The face is fairly well articulated. Like, it can actually deliver dialogue fairly well. Like, he never has any big long monologues or anything, but it does fine. One thing that really helps is that the stunt performer who wore the suit, his eyes are visible, so you actually get to see a human performance there.
Well, but between that and the articulation of the face, like, it fully emotes. Like, and I think that's an issue with the Chiklis suit, is that it's this big prosthetic thing. And I think it's tough for him to emote through that design. This one, there's times when it's like, yeah, he's angry, and yeah, he's sad, and I'm sad for him.
Yeah. The big thing with that particular character, like the way he was originally drawn, is he has this huge brow. And so that makes him very expressive. Like, if you look at the Chiklis one, they don't have that really exaggerated brow on him. But on this one, that brow is there and is articulated. So you really get that helping the performance out.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody's looking great. Eventually they get taken in, and they think it's by some benevolent government. Unbeknownst to them, they are in Latveria, and they have been captured by minions of doom.
There is one link in the chain we're kind of missing here, and that is the reason their ship crashed is because the diamond that was crucial to their experiment was replaced by the jeweler, which was originally supposed to be another character, but
yes, the mole man from the comics.
They couldn't get the rights to the mole man, so they replaced it with the jeweler, and he looks like this really hideous goblin leprechaun man. He looks like a villain from an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, basically. He's really fun on screen.
Well, yeah, I mean, because everybody's playing. Like, nobody's here slacking off or, again, looking down their nose. They're having a goof. The jeweler swaps out this crystal that they need for their space exploration, and that's what causes the accident in their shuttle. There is a subplot in which the jeweler, who is this underground gang leader of hobo miscreants, he's very 60s Batman, which again I love.
Oh yeah.
He kidnaps a woman to be his queen, and he just happens to kidnap this blind sculptor who Ben Grimm ran into. I think one time they had one interaction.
There was one interaction, and they both felt immediately deeply in love.
Yeah, and
so funny.
It's not even love at first sight because she's blind. Like,
exactly. Yeah, it was love at first touch.
Yeah, love at first bump. And they he's absolutely Google. Like, it again. This is utterly silly because as soon as he bumps into her and helps her pick her stuff up, like, he walks off with Reed and he's just like, Reed, I think I'm head over heels for her. I got to know, like, I got to get her number, get her digits. And
sure, it is utterly laughable, but you know what? I am fine with that because it meant I spent a night with my friend, like, laughing and having a good time. This movie's a good time.
Yeah, well, and then they have a one thing that you were saying is that the movie is a little starved for action in pretty much like the first half, because I think the movie's paced extremely well for the story that they're telling, but there aren't action beats. Like, it's a lot of like, hey, here's the setup, here's our characters, here's the situations. There's not an impetus to like, we got to have a big action sequence. So when they do get captured, there's a great montage of where they're being interviewed by this doctor. And there's some there's a totally great written joke in this sequence in which the doctor has a syringe out and he's going to stick Sue with it. And she turns invisible and he's like, where are you? And she pops up behind him and is like, I'm right here. And he turns around and goes, oh, and the syringe turns around and sticks into him. It's a great gag.
Yeah, it's that whole sequence is pretty funny with the doctor. And also the casting on the doctor is really, really good as well. They found exactly the right guy to play that character. So it is unable to afford any kind of really impressive action. There are several action scenes in the film, and of course they're nothing special from an action standpoint. But if you appreciate like old school superhero goofery from TV, you'll be right at home.
Well, I think, obviously they don't have the effects or the time or the budget or anything to do big action sequences, but they understand the need to nail a good concept in an action moment. Like, in this action scene, each character gets one moment to show off their power and thwart a bad guy, whether it's Reed sticking out his leg or, Sue turning invisible and fooling guards into shooting each other later, which is so awesome.
It's very cool. Yeah.
it's like, yeah, maybe it's not filmed amazingly well, but in the writing, like the writing of that gag and that showcase of the individual powers, it all works.
Again, the stretch effects for Reed Richards, like every single one of them is a practical gag. Like they had to build some stretchy arm or some stretchy bendy leg to accomplish whatever it is they were doing. And it's never not great.
I think there's one shot, maybe two later, where the camera is extremely far away and they have, I think, a matte painting going on, or like they're inserting a miniature. And I think it's a digital stretch. But for the most part, it's like, no, they built stretchy arms, or they show a stretchy arm and then cut to where the arm's coming in off frame. It's the kind of low budget problem solving that I always want to point out and commend in movies, because it's one of the things that I love the most about low budget filmmaking is seeing like, well, we couldn't do this thing. Like we were stuck, but that's what we wanted to do because it's in the script or whatever. How are we going to figure this out?
Right. So they had to get inventive. They had to get creative.
Yeah. And I think the Fantastic Four is an excellent showcase of low budget problem solving.
Of course, just like old television was, just like Star Trek, the original series was. One thing we haven't talked about is Dr. Doom post-transformation. Dr. Doom is played by Joseph Culp, who treats this role with, I want to say he treats it with a lot of gravitas, but it's not like he's taking the role in such a serious direction that it loses the fun. As a matter of fact, it is like optimum A+ level fun to watch him perform, because that's him in the suit.
Oh yeah, it's all him. In my read of it, it's like opera acting.
Yeah. Oh, it's what David Prowse and James Earl Jones did for Darth Vader in the original trilogy.
It really, I mean, that high praise, we know it is honestly deserved, because Joseph Culp is not just taking this as another gig. And it's an extremely difficult performance because you're masked up and armored up. Most times people can't see your eyes. However, when they start teasing Doom early in the movie, man, they have these awesome shots of a close-up of his eye in the mask with a single vertical beam of light stretched across it. It's fucking great.
It's also very like Inspector Gadget, very Claw. And I like how they play with that. But then when they start revealing more and more of him, it's like, oh, this is where the movie's really having a lot of fun. Like they do some wide shots of Dr. Doom in his lair sitting on his throne. And those shots are matte paintings or, digital compositions. But they're really fun. I mean, it's just straight out of a cartoon. It's perfectly done. I think for for the style of the film. I love that stuff. And then all of his dialogue is like pitch perfect villain dialogue where he explains exactly what he's going to do. The way he explains how he's going to fire a laser at New York. It's so fucking awesome.
It's classic serial bad guy stuff. It's Ming the Merciless. There's no need to play it any other way. It's like, this is a big operatic classic comic book villain. And the suit, for as low budget as it was, I'm telling y'all, this is the best live action on-screen Doctor Doom.
Well, it's just the Kirby stuff come to life. That's really all it is.
It's straight. It's like, we're just going to do this. So when everybody's talking about like, oh man, I just wish they do the comics. Look at this movie, because they just do the comic. And yeah, it's on an extreme low budget, but by golly, when Sue Storm walks out and is like, I made these for us. And she's got it's just the Fantastic Four costume, like no frills.
All these costumes and all these designs, like when they were originally conceived for the page, for their original comics, I mean, they had to be easy to draw. They had to be easy for any artist that Marvel was going to hire to pick up and draw those costumes. It doesn't get a whole lot simpler than a Fantastic Four costume. And it's difficult to tell because the scan of the film, like the dub that, is out there on the web, is so low quality. But like, you can tell that they had to cut corners. Like they show there are some photographs of the costumes out there. The stitching was very low quality. The placement of the four is a little low rent. But all of these things, these quote unquote mistakes, actually add up to the film being way more charming to me.
I know I've talked about this before, but it just brings me back to like one of the reasons they drew the designs they did was because good artists understand the effective power of simplicity in design. Like,
yes. Color, contrasts, Yeah,
that you don't need a whole bunch of, bells and whistles on a costume because it's going to affect the silhouette. It's going to look weird or bulky or something. And it's why I love classic stuff, and why, when we talk about this all the time, you and I, about the MCU, where everybody praises them for like, yay, they look like the comics. I'm like, no, they don't. They have this weird ultra super segmented design to every costume.
Here's the thing with MCU costumes as they're evolving now. The MCU costumes by and large are like evolving to look more and more like the comic book costumes, but movies like those that are shot on the digital formats, that they use, abhor a vacuum. And the textureless look of spandex does not read well on camera, and it looks cheap.
Well, it also just it doesn't scream realism.
Right. So it has to look functional, but more importantly, it has to have some sort of texture to it. So often they will repeat, really similar textures on all these MCU costumes to essentially break up the simpler forms of these costumes. But to see them presented here devoid of texture is fun. I really appreciate them going back to basics for this sort of thing. It didn't need to have some like incredibly textured pattern and
what it harkens to. We're bookending this month with, I think, very spiritually similar movies. It reminds me of the simplicity of the Christopher Reeve Superman costume.
Sure.
That's Superman on the page. Like, that's the costume. There's no need to do anything else to it.
It's very much like an Alex Ross type of approach. Like if you look at the way Alex Ross does superhero costumes, he very rarely puts any kind of fine texture on them. He just lets them look like spandex, which I am very okay with.
Yeah. So, I mean, Joseph Culp is amazing. Like, I love his performance. Unfortunately, because of the quality of the versions that are out there and the fact that they didn't go back and dub Doctor Doom's lines, there's times when you cannot understand what Doctor Doom is saying.
Well, I think they did loop his lines, but the director really liked how it sounded through the mask, and I'm actually inclined to agree. But it does affect the clarity. Yeah,
they looped it. He recorded them while wearing the mask that he wore for the costume. I believe, obviously, again, it's a quality thing too. Like, the quality that we have is downgraded, so we don't have the best soundtrack quality either.
Sure.
But I love, it's like he sounds like Doctor Doom doing his spiel, and it's great.
I expect the laser to be fully operational upon my return.
Well, I mean,
delicious.
When the Fantastic Four show up in his lair and he gets them in laser tubes, he traps them, and he reveals that like Reed has figured out like, this is Victor. This is my old pal Victor, and Reed reveals that like, I know it's Victor. Victor goes on this whole long, great classic villain spiel of like, I held this hatred for you forever. And it's like, you did this to me. And Joseph Culp just screams like, look at me, see it. And it's like,
and he's acting with his hands so fervently that it looks like he's doing sign language. And it's made even more amazing, like when they do the reveal later that his fingers extend into these big long metal claws. I was like, this rules. Like I was having so much fun. Doctor Doom is so fun to watch on screen in this film. The performance for it is just, I think, pitch perfect for what the movie was trying to do in earnest, which was to make a kid-friendly, wholly warm science fiction, like Jack Kirby style story. It's pulling that off. Does it do it with a whole lot of impressive aplomb? No, but it's got heart.
Well, and hey, I had so much genuine fun. What you know, when the end comes, there's a couple moments we should point out. The Human Torch has to speed to stop the laser that's going to destroy New York. The CGI comes on, and in all honesty, I'm like, I did not expect to see the full flame on full Human Torch in the movie. I was like, he shoots some, digital fireballs, and they repeat a few effect shots with that. And I was like, that's probably all we're going to get.
Sure.
And then they cut to a total CGI composition, and it's the Human Torch. And I was like, I felt like that moment in Jurassic Park with Jeff Goldblum, like, you did it, you crazy son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah. It is. The effects, of course, are from 1993 or 94, whenever they were rendered out. So do they look great? No, but like almost no CG looked good in 93 or 94. So that's not surprising to me. What is surprising to me is how much I laughed when the Human Torch finally puts himself in front of the beam of light, like to intercept the beam of light, like so that the laser doesn't hit New York. And he gets like, it looks like a juggle combo from a Street Fighter game. He just gets boing to boing to boing, like pummeled. It looked like a 120x combo.
It's awesome. It's so awesome. Of course, he's able to deflect the laser, and everybody saves the day. Mr. Fantastic and Doctor Doom have a classic superhero supervillain fight near a ledge, and Doctor Doom is hanging off, and Reed's holding him. He's like, "Come on, I can pull you up, Victor." But Doctor Doom allows his glove to slip off as he falls down into the pit. And then there is a great moment where, Reed walks away with Sue, and the camera slowly closes in on the glove sitting on the ledge, and the fingers start tapping. Oh, fucking great.
It is. I mean, the movie certainly has its like duller moments. The subplot with Ben Grimm, like exploring his sort of psychological thing where he's, not enjoying being a rock monster, which I get. He goes on this exploration of New York, which they shot guerrilla style. Weirdly enough, they're just like, well, we need to get somebody in the suit and shoot this footage. So let's get out in the streets of New York and make it happen.
They got the cast. I think it was the casting director that they got.
Yeah. They had the casting assistant, I think, to put the suit on and walk around the streets of New York for a couple hours so they can get the footage they needed. It's very funny. And then he like eventually mopes his way down into the sewers, where he is courted by the jeweler to like join his group of outcasts. But then of course it's revealed that the jeweler has been keeping his blind sculptor love captive to be his potential new bride. So of course they break her out, and that resolves that subplot. Does this film have particularly thoughtful portrayals of women? No, nope.
So the heroes win the day, and the movie ends with Sue and Reed getting married. And the final image of the movie, just to leave us on the highest of possible notes, is Sue and Reed getting into their limo with the just married sign on the back, driving away, and the sunroof opens, and a giant, stretchy, practical Mr. Fantastic hand waves goodbye to the audience. As the score swells, which we did not talk about, the score to this movie is legit great.
It's repetitive, but it's good. Like I think they reuse the same cues of like over and over, but all the cues are good. The two guys that composed it were brothers, and they actually ended up shelling a whole bunch of money out for a 40-piece orchestra. And I think, the place they recorded it, like I don't know what favor that somebody had to call in to get these guys to do with it. But, the music for the movie is good, like shocking. It really adds a lot of production value to the movie.
Well, I think that's a good note to go out on the movie proper, because as we said before, I think that the majority of people involved were doing it because of sheer creative passion. Like that when we hear that the brothers doing the score shelled out their own money for the studio, shelled out to get a 40-piece orchestra to do this, like there's so much about this movie that comes through on the screen that they were trying to make a good movie. This was not, it's a rinky-dink production. They're reusing sets from Carnosaur that, came out the year before, had been in production the year before.
Yeah. Makes me want to watch Carnosaur so I can be like, oh yeah, okay, that's the same place, but they just glued a bunch of Dixie cups on the wall.
But my gosh, like at the end of it, I really truly believe that this is the best live action Fantastic Four movie that we've gotten yet. Now, I've not seen The Rise of the Silver Surfer, and I actually will defend, in theory, Josh Trank's movie, because there's a lot about that I support, but the final product is not a good movie. But the Tim Story one, I have very bland passing memories of, and I did not see the sequel. This is the best Fantastic Four movie I've seen, and it's not just by, weak competition. I think this is a really good classic comic book movie that, again, we didn't mean to do this, really pairs well with the same kind of intention and warmth and respect that we found in Donner's first Superman movie.
Mm-hmm. Sincerity is where it's at. And I think when you partner that sincerity with the necessary ingenuity it takes to get a movie like this made for only $1 million, the outcome is bound to be interesting. But here it's more than just interesting. Like it's actually, I think, really enjoyable, like a good movie. Is it a great film? No, like you certainly have to watch this with a certain mindset. One of the reasons that Drew and I are going to like it, of course, is because we're suckers for like lost movies. Drew and I just really love that. If you're into the whole idea of like lost movies that have, been buried but are now available, like you got to see this. You got to see this.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of we'll get into the unique story of why that is in a second. But before we switch gears over to the shelf, I do want to take a look back at Superhero Month, because I do think I learned some things. I will say the majority of the movies that we watched, we were not crazy about. And we did not, we weren't like The Shadow, The Guyver, Superman 2, the Donner cut is way down there on both of our lists of the movies we've done this year.
The first Superman is part like utterly like world shatteringly good. And then the rest of it is kind of like, it's all right.
Yes. I don't think a superhero movie really is a genre. Like it's a way to say what a movie is to some people and be like, okay, it's got certain things, certain expectations. But looking across the board of what we did, we saw a lot of classical attempts at trying to do what people believe a superhero movie is. And the thing that I think we came away from it is the best superhero movies, even the ones that aren't very good, are being made by people who have a sincere understanding and love of doing this stuff sincerely.
Yeah, and that's not to say that, like, say, Zack Snyder's love of Superman isn't sincere. I'm sure he likes Superman a lot. I'm sure he may love the whole idea of Superman, but his approach of like a character like Superman as, say, a reluctant even like anti-hero in moments is not the kind of approach that that particular character needs. It's about understanding what the heart, the core of the character is, and
Well, I mean,
trying to find ways to approach that in the genre.
not to
in the template, really.
Not to get off on a huge Zack Snyder rant, but to that point, it's that he loves a version of Superman and Batman and these heroes that come from a place not of insincerity, but of deconstruction.
Yes, and some degree of cynicism.
Yeah, absolutely, some degree. Like he comes from the realm of the Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller stuff, and that stuff was groundbreaking and historic and is good for what it is, but it's a deconstruction and a cynical look at these kinds of characters and trying to translate that into these big budget movies and these characters that run on sincerity and heart and absolutely a total lack of cynicism in the foundations of them. I think that's where that kind of clashes. And the movies that we did, superhero stuff, it's broad enough that of course we could come back to this, another month. And granted, the whole reason we did superheroes even was because we wanted to do the Suicide Squad, and the Suicide Squad is currently a potential for both of our favorite movies of the year.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that is like, look, you can be irreverent and fun and R-rated, because I know that's the thing that a lot of people want out of superheroes, but it doesn't mean you have to lack sincerity or heart or warmth or genuine feelings in these stories. You can tell an infinitely diverse number of superhero stories, but at the core of them all, I don't think you can have the kind of like cynical take that a lot of these modern movies and people love the MCU, but it's also a matter of like, just take these things at face value sometimes, Sure.
Yeah. And I know that they've been well explored at their face values in the original comics, but also I feel like a lot of those sort of versions of the characters are being lost to time with new interpretations becoming ever more popular. Like you and I watched a movie this month in which the Joker's cartoon character girlfriend, like a character originally just conceived to be a cartoon character who was the Joker's girlfriend. She is played by Margot Robbie, who, incredibly prestigious actress, Margot Robbie. And the character murders a bunch of people in extraordinarily gory fashion in a movie we watched today. So it's like, okay, that understanding and interpretation of the character is so far removed from where the character came from that it's actually kind of a little alarming to think about, but it still ends up being a good movie for lots of reasons.
I could have a very deep read of this that I'm not going to get into as far as the origins of Harley Quinn and what she was doing in her first appearance. But
sure. I haven't seen that episode, enough times to be Drew Teach about it, but I think you understand the point I'm getting at here is like the closeness of the Fantastic Four movies tone to Jack Kirby's sort of idea of what the Fantastic Four should be feels probably like the most classical of any of the films we watched.
It feels true
this month.
Like
yeah.
it feels true to what it is. And like you said, that first half of Donner's Superman, it's like, this is Superman at face value. This is the purest distillation of the myth of this character.
But it was also like an incredibly like rich cinematic science fiction interpretation of it, which people hadn't quite seen yet.
There was stuff there in the comics, but again, it was like, I think we said on that episode, it's like, it took it totally seriously, more seriously than, maybe some people might have believed certain elements of Superman to be, but it was all there. There's a reason that movie opens with the curtain spreading and a black and white thing of Action Comics being flipped through. It's like, we want to do this justice. And we want to take
let's start at the beginning.
Yeah. So I mean, and all these movies, like even the ones that we didn't like, it's like, I believe that they took the material like seriously in most elements, in their core elements, I would say. And I value that. And I think obviously that's one of the reasons people love the MCU and people want, that they equate something with the DC movies like, well, seriousness is, grim and dark and all that. And it's like, no, you can have a movie like the Fantastic Four or Richard Donner's Superman or the Suicide Squad or even the Guyver in the Shadow. And it's like, just be sincere to the characters. Like
Mm.
you don't need to drench them in realism to make it that come across as sincerity. Like some of the best moments that we had this month, I think, were rejections of realism.
And also rejections of cool.
Yeah.
It's okay. You know, I understand that movies have to be cool in order to make money. But some of my favorite moments were like, oh, this is actually nerdy and not cool, and, you know, stuff that people might actually kind of bristle against because it's silly. You know, that moment, you know, for instance, where Rick Flag and Harley Quinn look at one another during their whole like badass walk moment, where it's like, actually, these two characters are having a little connection here, and it's important that the movie is taking a brief aside to show us that.
Or Rick Flag rubbing Harley Quinn's back with a gun. Like
That's very funny. Yeah.
Not a cool moment. It's not cool at all, but it's super endearing. Like, and it's small. Like I love superhero stories, and it bums me out to think that the kinds of films that we're going to get are going to become more and more homogenized.
I mean, I hope not. I mean, we weren't in a position 5 years ago where a movie like The Suicide Squad could exist.
No, I mean,
we're there now.
No, you know, so I look forward to the future of superhero movies. I want all the diversity. That there's so much great stuff out there that's different and weird and unique and sincere. And I hope we keep seeing more of it, because it's you know, coming from GenreVision, it's not a genre to be explored. It's just a very blanket idea that you can fit all sorts of infinite uniqueness inside of.
It's a narrative template. Yep.
So we will now hop over to the shelf, where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we encourage you, loyal listener, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. We love doing the shelf. It's a collaborative thing. And when you leave a shelf pick in the comments and highlight that it's your shelf pick, we will feature it on next week's show. And Travis and I don't know if we've ever done this before. Maybe. Been doing the show a long time.
I think we've done this once or twice where you and I have the same shelf pick.
It's
just agreed to have a mutual shelf pick.
Well, this one feels very specific, not so much necessarily in thematic similarity or anything. I actually think this might be an essential companion film to the Fantastic Four from 1994 as its official release date. This is Doomed, the untold story of Roger Corman's Fantastic Four. It's a documentary that managed to get together a lot of the players. Like, they get pretty much the entire main cast to interview. They get the director, Oli Sasson, a number of other people involved with the production. They got even a couple of shots of Corman in his office. Next to that, you know, he put up his the man with the X-ray eyes and Tomb of Lygia posters, which I've seen in other documentary stuff. He loves he's very proud of those movies.
And he's very diplomatic. You know, it's kind of a just business sort of thing. And
it's one of the ways
he doesn't reveal too much about what happened.
But this movie, this documentary, is very good in the way that it tells its story, and frankly enlightened me to dispelling certain notions that I had always believed about this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you and I had always thought it was just an ash can movie. An ash can movie, if you don't know, is something that is made by a studio simply because the rights are about to expire, and they need to make something so that the rights won't expire for the rights holder.
Well, and most of the time, whatever the contracts, they don't need to make a finished movie. They just have to prove that a movie is in development and being on its way to being made.
Right. Yeah. That is either on the way to production or in production.
That's what we had always heard. This movie, I won't spoil exactly where it goes, because it did dispel that idea. I was like, oh no, it's, that very early on, they have a quote, I believe possibly from Stan Lee, who says that movie was never meant to be seen. And then another quote from one of the main producers that says, no, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not what's going on here. The movie does a very good job the documentary does a very good job of tracing the production times. It's an extremely short production schedule.
Of course.
I think they had like a month, like if that. Like,
I'm surprised they had that long, frankly.
Yeah. So it came together very quickly. Everybody is extremely candid, because why wouldn't they be? Except Roger Corman, because that's how he stayed in business for so long, was being the ultimate diplomat. But everybody else who has nothing to lose is like, this was my experience and this is how I feel about it. And
The two leads of it, really, the guy who plays Reed Richards and the guy who plays Dr. Doom, their interviews are fascinating. And then also the guy who was the casting assistant, he's a fantastic storyteller. Like anytime he's on camera, the documentaries are utterly riveting. This is the ultimate companion piece to it. It's really the only recommendation, or really the best recommendation I can make as a pairing to 1994's Fantastic Four. Watch them both. That's my recommendation. Watch them both.
that's what we did. Like we watched the Fantastic Four, then we immediately watched the documentary.
Yep.
We were like, we got to know what's going on here. So a definite recommendation, but we will hop over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on the Guyver. Eric Fuchs went with the Tom Hardy Venom. Wall Trumpus went with Fist of the North Star, which I believe I mentioned. I don't know if he means the series or the 86 movie, but either one's a good time. JT went with Zack Snyder's Watchmen for the reasons of, much like we were with the Guyvers, like, how can there be such amazing, cool moments and then a movie that makes me be like, why are you doing this to me? That's his description. That's what he said. Stephen Nesbello went with the 90s Flash series with John Wesley's Ship, and Mark Hamill shows up as the Trickster. Fun show. Mr. Milksteak had a recommendation pick of Jack Brooks' Monster Slayer, and then an anti-shelf pick of Wes Craven's Swamp Thing. Which I don't know how to respond to. I'm not like a huge fan of Swamp Thing, the movie. But you know, it's not bad. It's not terrible. Like, but he explains it. You can go read his comments at GenreVision.com, and had a very nice conversation, because that's what happens in the GenreVision comments is people have nice conversations.
Thank you for that, listeners.
Yes, it is always a treat. And thank you for all these shelf picks. Love seeing them every week, and looking forward to the ones for the Fantastic Four, a movie that never legally got released. Now, we do have to do some quick calls to action, but stick around, because we're going to be having a rare video game corner for Currently Consuming. Travis and I both have video games to talk about. But we do want to let everybody know that the new schedule is up at GenreVision.com. You can go to GenreVision.com, click schedule, and you can see what's coming up for September and October. The theme months are there, and we've talked about them on Patreon a whole bunch, so if you know, you know, but if not, they're right up there on the schedule page at GenreVision.com. You would know what we were doing and how the process of everything we picked happened if you become a patron at patreon.com/GenreVision.
Yeah, we did 2 pre-shows about the scheduling of these 2 episodes, where we sat down and talked about what would be good. We got some feedback from our patrons at patreon.com, and that whole process can be elucidated to you if you sign up for the $5 a month premium subscriber tier.
And last but not least, if you love what we do here on the show, please review the show on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews, we ask for it every week, and I say it every week. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't important. It really is important. It's a little thing that you can do to help the show out. We love hearing the reviews. We even featured a bad one in the last couple months because it was a fun review.
Oh, we always do the bad ones when we get them.
It's
we
true.
Try to make good on that promise. If you review the show, we're going to feature it here.
Exactly. So if you do leave a written review on the Apple Podcast Store, we will feature it here on the show. Let's close out with some Currently Consuming.
Num 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 num.
Travis, what have you been playing, apparently?
I listened to the Script Notes podcast, which is hosted by 2 screenwriters, 2 big professional screenwriters, John August and Craig Mazin. You may know Craig Mazin as the guy who wrote the Chernobyl miniseries for HBO.
All right, superhero movie.
Yes, he did that movie with James Gunn all those years ago.
Yes,
too.
the specials.
The specials and superhero movie, 2 movies he does not like to talk about at all. He also wrote Rocket Man with Harlan Williams back in the day. Craig Mazin has a bunch of shitty comedies on his filmography, unfortunately. Identity Thief with Melissa McCarthy.
But you made Chernobyl.
He did, and as a matter of fact, he says he's never going back to feature writing, because he was finally able to do something he really wanted to do, and that was make Chernobyl. And he was very heavily involved, because writers in television are much more heavily involved as creative forces in television production. And now he's doing The Last of Us. So for HBO, he is adapting the Naughty Dog video game for their network, and is shooting it in Canada currently. So I decided to replay The Last of Us, which I'd played before. And then I had not played The Last of Us 2 last year when it came out because I heard it was technically impressive, but also incredibly grueling and nasty and grim and depressing. And there was a whole lot of like hubbub and fervor about it because it had women and politics of it, the kind of things that like white guy gamer like dudes they tend to whine about. So I just wanted to stay away and let that kind of fervor die down a bit before I approached it. I also wanted the price to drop because I don't like to pay $60 for games anymore. So I'm playing it now, and on a technical level, of course, it's really impressive. You know, I love Naughty Dog's approach to contemporary action gaming, and really their approach to storytelling in contemporary gaming. I think their cinematics are the best in the biz. Nobody does them better. They're incredible. Like if you want to get a taste of what they do, like, you know, watch some cinematics from Uncharted 4. I've never seen better directed cinematics. I've never seen better looking cinematics. Like in engine, like holy shit. Incredible. And I'm playing it on a first generation PS4. I don't have a PS4 Pro. PS5s don't technically exist. I don't think, even though people say they have them, I'm not sure they do. So the fact that the game looks this incredible on that old system, like, of course my PS4 howls like a jet engine, but that's because, you know, they're really pushing the console to its limitations technically. Is it as grim and as grueling and nasty and unpleasant as the reviews have said? Indeed it is. Indeed it is. But I am nevertheless like pretty constantly impressed by what's going on in the game. I think the way that they've managed to capture performance and show it in cinematic ways, like it's kind of fucking killer. I really love that game on that level. Am I a fan of how it, like, I don't know, makes me kill a whole bunch of dogs and, you know, tries to make the violence feel like horrible? Like, I'm not a huge fan of that. Not a big fan of that. Like the dogs thing is fairly new. Like I just got to the first encounter where they're like, oh, now these other humans are going to sick dogs on you and you got to kill the dogs. And I was just like, fuck, this isn't like Wolfenstein. Like it doesn't have that layer of like, you know, exploitation sheen to it. This is just like, no, the dogs can smell your scent, you know, press this button to see the scent trail you're leaving. And yeah, you'll have to kill the dog. Fuck, not fun. Anyway, that's The Last of Us Part 2. I'll probably update people on that as I finish the game.
Yeah, I've not played any of the Last of Us games. At this point, I think I'm past it. I will probably check out the show because it's the same thing with the Uncharted games and a lot of games where I'm like, they feel more like movie experiences than they necessarily are total game experiences. And that's not a bad thing.
I would agree with you if the gameplay wasn't so good.
Fine, yeah,
especially in Uncharted 4, like, holy shit.
Yeah, but I don't know. A lot of those kinds of games, they just feel like the gameplay can be good, but it feels like you're just wanting to get to the next cutscene so you can see how the story develops. And it's like, yeah, okay. Like, I'm not against that. Trust me, I sunk so much time into Metal Gear Solid games, so I have been through cutscene hell.
Well, the cutscene approach to this is very different from Metal Gear Solid, where it's just like Hideo Kojima trying to do his like weird cinematics for hours and hours. Like Death Stranding had a bit of that. Like I played through most of Death Stranding before I got really frustrated with it. But the Uncharted stuff is so relentlessly propulsive and well acted, and the performances come through so well in the capture.
Yeah, I tried to play one of those. I can't remember which one, and I just didn't feel it. And that's okay.
The older ones are not, you know, there are a couple of those older ones, like particularly the first one's not great. Second one has some fun stuff, but 4, holy crap. Ooh.
Well, anyhow, like I've not played the games again at this point. I just don't think they're for me.
It's fine.
But, you know, maybe the show will be. Maybe the show will intrigue me enough to take the plunge. We'll see. I'm also going to talk about a video game that was mentioned in the comments last week that I had known about but had forgotten existed. This is Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. This is apparently from the people who make the Yakuza games.
Okay.
Which I have never, I don't even know if I've seen anything from them. But I know they have their following. They have a number of games out there. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember seeing about this and being like, oh, Fist of the North Star, cool. And I love me some classic anime ultra violence, as I talked about last week on the Guyver. And so it's one of the PlayStation hits. So it's, you know, it was $20. Picked it up and having a good time with it. Like it's got a lot that I like in the sense of I'm sure I've talked about this, and I've certainly talked about it with Travis, and that like the big open world games like don't hold a lot of appeal to me because for the most part it feels like a lot of the illusion of depth and width, where it's like, well, you're really kind of just doing the same things over and over again, no matter how big the map tells you it is.
Yeah.
Because I recently played that like Assassin's Creed 4, which is the first Assassin's Creed game I played, and I was like, okay, yeah, this was fun for what it is, but it is just a lot of like I'm just going around doing the same thing. The majority of Fist of the North Star is taking place in this one city, and the map is relatively to a lot of games very small, but within that there's so much that you can do, like so many side quests that are unique, so many different types of mini games that can, affect certain like the bar mini game in Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise has me so addicted. In which you as a character decide to take on the role of a bartender, and patrons come in and they ask you for certain drinks, and there's like 3 different methods of making a drink, which it's like rotating the analog stick or pressing these buttons or actually physically shaking the controller. But by doing that, you gain a rapport with them, and a lot of them are shop owners in the town. So when you make them happy with a good drink, things unlock in their shops and stuff. It's like,
I like that. That's an interesting game. Yeah.
It's also, it's Fist of the North Star. So if anybody knows, like the whole deal with that is like, it's crazy Kung Fu, super Dragon Ball Z type technique fighting stuff. And that comes through in the game. It also comes through in the bar mini game. So it's like when he stirs a drink, he's stirring it so fast that a tornado is coming up out of the drink. And like, it's a very funny game because it recognizes like, yeah, this is ridiculous. Like this dude hits pressure points on people and they bubble up and explode. Like yay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, fine. Yes. It feels in the comments, I believe it was either Steven Espella or possibly Mr. Milkshake. I don't have the comments up because I'm bad, but, they talked about, it's like, it feels like a PS2 like JRPG type game. And I'm like, well, I know what those are. Like I'm very familiar with that kind of gameplay. But it's fun. Like there's just so much to do in it, and it has the total spirit of Fist of the North Star. It's a totally original story that uses a bunch of familiar characters and stuff. It's just simple fun. And you know me, like that's me. And I played another game that I beat in like 3 hours that was just that. It's like, yeah, this is a nice, simple fun, but within the simplicity of Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, there's just a lot of different shit to do. You get a car that you can upgrade to drive around the wasteland to look for treasures. Like normally that kind of stuff puts me off of a lot of games because like I tell you, I feel like there's so much to do. I don't feel that I can get everything the game wants me to get out of it. But the way this staggers everything, I feel like I'm doing everything I want to do. It's an extremely fun time. I'm glad somebody, I believe it was Steven Nesbella, mentioned it in the comments and reminded me like, oh yeah, I should check. Is that a It's like, hey, it was $20. Boop. And, I have some other video games, which we'll talk about when we do our extended currently consuming episode on Patreon, that will be coming out in about maybe a week or so before the end of the month. And, it's been a more video game kind of time, but we want to thank everybody for sticking through Superhero Month with us, and we'll be kicking off next month's theme, Satan Timber, an entire month of movies which feature what Travis and I are calling actual Satans.
Yeah, where the devil their self, the devil shows up, the actual devil, not some fucking rando demon. The devil.
Yep.
I cannot fucking wait.
Yep. Lucifer themselves. And it's a variety of movies. We're doing a whole bunch of different types of movies, but we're kicking things off with a versus episode of The Devil's Advocate and Angel Heart.
Pacino, De Niro.
Yeah, we're putting Pacino and De Niro's devils up against each other. So come check out Satan Timber with us next week and all of next month. And as always, want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I love you. This is GenreVision.
Caught me off guard with that one.
Bye.
Bye.